the ophthalmologist said, it was a Wednesday. He's like, how soon can we get you in? I said, well, how soon do you need me? He's like, how about Friday? Like 2 days away.
Wow.
And that impressed on me the immediacy of the situation pretty quickly. I see someone come in and they obviously have that look of uncertainty and anxiety that I'm familiar with. And you feel that with them. You really start thinking, okay, this is not so much about just me anymore, or me being, in my family. There's a bigger experience and there's a bigger social contract that we have to kind of live out.
Jeremy Swearingen's life was filled with family, work, and a daily running streak until a diagnosis disrupted everything. What followed is a journey of healing. Welcome to the CARTI Hopecast, where we explore stories that shape us, journeys of resilience, hope, and perseverance. We seek the lessons that emerge when we face the unexpected and find strength in the struggle. I'm Adam Head, your host, and today I'm joined by Jeremy Swearingen, a husband, father, attorney, and cancer survivor. After a surprise lymphoma diagnosis, Jeremy found himself navigating the tension between control and surrender. His story reveals the strength it takes to carry on and the clarity that sometimes only comes after everything changes. Jeremy, thanks for joining us today on the CARTI Hopecast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Looking forward to it. Before we get started, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Feeling good, and glad to be here. Glad to be, on about the fourth year almost of being in the clear, so to speak, for my diagnosis. So I'm glad to be here and feeling good.
I love it. And you've got the coolest red shoes.
Oh, thanks.
That you brought in. Those are your podcast shoes.
I appreciate it.
Well, before we jump into the last few years, I wanted to talk a little bit about life before your diagnosis. You were living a full and active life, raising 2 sons, running daily, building a legal career. What did life for you look like right before everything radically shifted?
That's a very good question, because it was going well. And I say that by meaning I felt like I was in the best shape of my life, just staying active and having 2 kids, getting them involved in their school. One is age 17, one is age 12. We were taking them to and from school events. We're both trying to stay active. We're both trying to maintain our careers, and I was, doing things with my practice, and everything was rocking along smoothly until it was interrupted, and it was a wake-up call just to get jostled out of that comfort of everyday life where things seem to be just going on cruise control, and then all of a sudden you hit a bump, and then another bump, and then all of a sudden it comes to a screeching halt while you deal with something that came out of the blue,
Yeah. Well, your symptoms, as I understand, started with something small, just an irritation in your eye. At one point, did you go from, it's probably nothing, to, no, something really isn't right here?
Yeah, and it was interesting because I'm outside a lot, and we try to stay active. And as, the late fall, early winter, started to get some irritation in my left eye, which I thought, maybe it's allergies or whatever. Sure. We got into the spring, and I noticed, hey, this irritation's not really going away. And I still thought it was just allergies, or maybe, I was sweating so much wearing sunglasses that I got an infection in my eye or something that was causing that kind of irritation. And so I kept an eye on it, no pun intended. But I tried different kind of over-the-counter remedies such as eye drops or whatever, Zyrtec to take. And that didn't seem to resolve any of the symptoms. And the symptoms that I experienced were some redness and some irritations, like I had something in my eye all the time. Mm-hmm. and the redness never really went away. And I didn't think anything of it other than I just thought, man, this is unusual. And it wasn't until the late spring of 2021 where I got up one morning and I looked in the mirror and I saw the white part of my eye had this unusual texture that I thought, that looks weird. And I called my wife in. I was like, take a look at this. This looks unusual. And she's like, yeah, that doesn't look right. You need to go and see an ophthalmologist just to get it checked out. And I said, yeah, I mean, I don't know what they could do, but if they can rule out something worse, then all the better. And so that's kind of the impetus that started my progression into getting diagnosed and starting that whole that whole journey. And I can tell you, even at that early stage, I still did not even have an inkling that it might be something as serious as cancer. It just didn't even show up on my radar because I'd never even heard of eye cancer or that there is a type of lymphoma that can affect the tissues that are mucosal tissues. And the type of cancer that I had was called a malt lymphoma, which is a localized type of lymphoma.
So you've talked about this word lymphoma. Talk about the moment where you heard that word, heard a physician use that for the first time. What did that moment do to you, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally? And how did you process it with your wife, Katie?
It was interesting because it was on the second trip back to the ophthalmologist. The first trip involved her giving me some drops, steroid drops, which within 2 weeks' time should have made whatever it was to resolve, at least to some extent. So when I came back and those drops hadn't really worked at all, she started asking me questions that are kind of the telltale questions that you hear associated with cancer, at least that I was familiar with. So I'm sitting in there with all this eye stuff around, the different devices and everything. And the ophthalmologist said, well, have you noticed any other symptoms that seem unusual to you? Like, have you had any kind of unusual loss of weight, or have you had any feelings of fatigue, or have you had any kind of night sweats? And so as she started to click off those particular symptoms, I got this feeling of like dread. Because I'm like, I know why you're asking me these questions. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, come to think of it, I have been having some night sweat type of issues, and which I had separated in my mind as being a total different thing. Because I thought, well, the weather's getting warmer, it's late spring. Maybe I'm sleeping under too many covers, except you don't, you sleep under covers, but you don't wake up, drenched usually. And I had just kind of dissociated myself from that. But when she started asking those questions, I thought, wow, I know why you're asking me these questions. And then I said, so what are you thinking this could be? And she said, well, we can't say for sure yet, but there are two types of things. One is a benign kind of an irritation. We hope that that's what it's going to be. And the other is a more serious deal that we have to check out. And it's a type of lymphoma that will require treatment if that's what it is. And she brought in another ophthalmologist who is a surgeon, and he took a look at it. And he's like, yeah, we need to do a biopsy to try to figure out whether you have one or the other. And that was all kind of like from that point, to answer your question, I was kind of in shock, because you go into an eye doctor appointment and you think, oh, I got irritation, or they're going to give me some other kind of medicine. You don't come out of there thinking, oh, I'm going to get potentially diagnosed with cancer, or that there's a 50-50 chance or whatever. So I was just shell-shocked. And it was almost like everything they started saying from that point forward during that visit was turned down volume.
Sure.
And was muffled. And then I got in the car. My eyes were still dilated from the drops that they had given me. And everything was just so bright outside, yet I was numb. And I got on the phone with my wife and told her, and she said, what? And, there you go. I mean, the journey was on, so to speak. And it was a very, very emotionally trying time from that point, forward.
So you're in this kind of waiting period now between these couple of possible outcomes, which certainly could be excruciating. And you've described it that way. What was going through your mind in those days, and how did you stay grounded?
Well, I knew that we would take things one step at a time, and we had made a decision to try not to alarm the boys.
Okay.
Just because of, Luke was, early teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Jude was still a young guy. I mean, he was, he's 12 now, and 4 years ago, I guess he was 8.
Mm-hmm.
But we were only going to discuss what we knew or what we had been told by our doctors. And the next step was to get the biopsy done, which involved, surgery on your eye, which is no fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because, I still thought, okay, this is something that's not so urgent that they can set out when it's convenient for me and convenient for the family schedule. And the ophthalmologist said, it was a Wednesday. He's like, how soon can we get you in? I said, well, how soon do you need me? He's like, how about Friday? Like 2 days away.
Wow.
And that impressed on me the immediacy
Mm-hmm.
of the situation
Yeah.
pretty quickly. So from that point, when I had the eye biopsy, it was a waiting game to find out because it had to be sent to a pathologist, a certain type of pathologist,
Mm-hmm.
which I can tell you more about that, later. And then waiting on the results. And the whole waiting period is just so anxiety ridden. Every night, just all I could think about was whether the results were going to show something benign or whether it was going to be something like cancer. And I still, at that point, didn't know much about what kind of cancer it could possibly be. I mean, they told me a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and then I tried to go down the rabbit hole of Google and finding out everything I possibly could about that particular kind of cancer. But from a lay person, if you're not equipped to really get down into the nuts and bolts because you don't have all the information yet, it becomes very scary because you start
Absolutely.
trying to see percentages and probabilities and things of that nature, and it puts just fear into you. And anyway, as time came around, I think I had the surgery in, it ended up being early May or something like that, or mid-May, and it was going to take a week or so to get the results back. Somewhere along that time, that was the Memorial Day weekend, so it was going to take even longer. And so the waiting game extended, and it wasn't an enjoyable Memorial Day weekend, and
Certainly.
So we finally got the diagnosis, and it was a malt lymphoma, and the doctors tried to encourage me by saying, well, this is very treatable, and if you're going to have a type of cancer, you want something like this, if you could even say you want something like this, because it's so treatable. And we'll hook you up and we'll get you going and you'll go from there.
Once treatment began, you said the early days felt manageable until they weren't. What changed for you physically and emotionally as your treatment journey progressed?
That's a good question. And I consider myself very, very blessed and fortunate to have had the type of cancer that I had because it's so treatable. So many cancers involve types of treatment that are really just hard on the patient. I mean, chemotherapy or immunotherapy and side effects, or having to go through more involved surgeries. I had my eye biopsy, which was really, really gosh darn painful. But then they told me in terms of my treatment, it was going to involve radiation therapy over a period of time. And they explained to me kind of the risks and the side effects and things that would come from that. But I thought, well, I can manage that, And there's an interim period too during my kind of initial diagnostic period where you have the other scans that go along with an initial diagnosis. And that was very scary as well. The PET scan that I had to try to rule out, make sure that there wasn't cancer anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And it's another level of anxiety where I can tell you that when I had the PET scan and I was in there in the machine the first time, I cried, and I'm not an emotional guy, but I mean, I cried because I was scared and I was like, heavy. How did I get there?
Absolutely.
But then, so I get in starting the radiation therapy, and it was an unusual experience. I mean, I had great care, and they explained how it would work. And I had a mask that fit over my head to hold my head in place while the radiation was localized on my eye. And it's an unusual experience because the radiation, I kept my eyes closed, but the light illuminates the inside of your eye like it's daylight, except it's kind of a blue or green light. It's very strange. Interesting. And I thought at first, first week or so, I thought, oh, this is nothing. I can handle this. I go in, I'm getting better. This is treating the cancer. I'm all for this. But after a while, starts to set in. You're going every few days or every other day to get the therapy. And all of a sudden, the discomfort from the radiation starts to set in. And just the feeling of, this is I'm no longer as tough and optimistic as I thought I was. I just want to be done, but you have to keep going. And eventually it got to where I was just ready to be done with it. And it was uncomfortable. And I had it easy compared to many patients. I had it so easy.
Well, the scans that you were getting now more routinely brought a new wave of fear, and you've described that a little bit. I think you've termed it before scanxiety. And what did you learn about anxiety, trauma, or just your own vulnerability in these moments when you were going from testing and now waiting for results and going through that?
The initial scanning and testing that I had was obviously the most anxiety ridden, because at that point you're trying to find out if there's cancer anywhere else. And, it's almost a comforting feeling to think, okay, it's localized. But if there's a possibility that it's somewhere else, then you have a whole new level of complication that you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
So when I found out that what I had was more localized, I felt better about that. And knowing there was a comfort level in going through the treatment, because while you're in treatment, you're getting healed and that you're fighting the cancer. But once the treatment ended and I would come back for the routine MRI to make sure that, where there's no sign of disease, or, that at the 6-month mark or at the 1-year mark, and you're on pins and needles once again, because what was formerly like a daily thing that you would worry about all day, every single moment, thinking about cancer, kind of started to fade away up until the point where you came back to get your routine scan again. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about it nonstop again. And then you get a good result and you breathe that sigh of relief, and you have another, the process repeats until you go in again.
Well, you maintained, and this is amazing to even say, you maintain a daily running streak throughout your diagnosis and treatment, even post-surgery. What made that streak so important to you in the face of cancer?
Well, I had started it just as for fun, to do one of those January 100 days streaks to see if you could, to start off a new year. And it stuck. I think it was January. It was the 2019 that I started it, and it's stuck. So I thought, well, I'll keep going, and it kept going and kept going. It gets self-perpetuating, and I got to 2021. So I was, I was over 2 years into it, and I thought, well, this is certainly going to interrupt this. And it was funny because when I was having the biopsy, and I was talking to the ophthalmologist about what I should or shouldn't do after they do the biopsy on my eye. And I said, I got this thing going, it's a run streak. And they're like, yeah, sorry about that. And I said, well, what? Hold on. Can I go and do my mile? Because the streak is you have to run a continuous mile in a calendar day. It has to be a bona fide, at least a jog.
Mm-hmm.
At least it can't be a walk, not even a walk fast. It has to be a run or a jog. And it has to be a continuous mile, and it has to be within a calendar day for it to count. And I was very religious about doing it right. I mean, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it with the integrity of making sure that I do it right. For example, if I trip and fall and have to take a breather to check on a stub toe, well, my mile's going to start over from that point that So the doctors were looking at me and they were like, this is not a good idea. I said, well, I can do the mile before the biopsy, and then I'll have that whole day to heal up and that night to sleep, and I'll get up the next morning. I know it's going to be bad, but I can do a slow track mile or something like that. And they said, you realize you're going to have some stitching in your eye, and you put that at risk if you jar it too much. And I said, well, I'll go on the track, go easy, and my wife will be there to make sure I'm taking it easy. So I did. It was painful. But after that first day, I thought, okay, that one's out of the way. I can do the next day. And it became a thing where I knew I was going to get a run in. So no matter how bad I felt, I could go and I could run a mile. It could be a slow mile. I could get out there and check that box off and know that that's one thing that I'm not going to do, despite the fact that I've had this surgery on my eye, or that I just got out of radiation and, I'm not feeling all that great. I'm going to keep doing it. And it got easier and easier, kept on going until I decided to end it on my own. And that was that.
Well, I want to talk about when and how you ended it on your own. So after nearly 2,000 days of running, you chose to end this streak on your own terms. And we're talking about rain, I would imagine snow at some points, possibly storms, and in the midst of treatment. What did those runs mean to you, and what went into your decision to finally end this streak?
They were important because it was kind of a symbol to myself that I could continue on and do at least this one thing each day and make it a discipline that it's going to happen. Just a question of when. And so I knew that my run each day would take place, and I could check that day off and get one day closer, one day longer in the streak. And all of my runs were outside. So I had the weather to contend with. I had whatever to contend with. There were days when, I think I did a couple of miles in an airport or something like that.
Wow.
But eventually it got to the point where some of my friends, I had a couple in particular who had streaks, and I heard just by happenstance, one of them contacted me, and then I heard about the other by accident, and their streaks, which were longer than mine, ended because of a health issue. And they were just very upset about the fact that they just could not do that next day. It wasn't possible. Yeah. And I thought, I'm coming up on day 2000, which was June 24th of last year, and feeling good and feeling strong, but I want it to end on my terms. I'm going to do it because I want to end it. And I knew, part of the radiation therapy that I had in my eye, they told me within 3 to 5 years, you're going to get a cataract. And when that happens, don't be surprised, but it'll happen. It's a certainty. All you need to do is you'll get it fixed, and you'll have cataract surgery like every other person who has cataract surgery has. And I thought, well, in January of 2024, it showed up all of a sudden. I'm like, wow, I got a cataract.
Predicted.
It's cloudy, just like they said. And I thought, well, I'm going to continue running as long as I can until this thing starts to get to where it needs to be addressed. And it got pretty cloudy in that eye. The other eye was fine, but I needed to get it done, and I knew this time around I'm not going to take a chance. I'm not going to have a streak going when I do that surgery, whenever it is that I do it. So I knew, all right, so 2000 was off in the summer, and I said, that's as good a time as any to end this streak. I can keep running, and I have, but it's not something that I have to do daily or that I feel compelled to do. I'm going to run because it brings me joy, because I'm out with friends or at an event, charity event, or raising money for this or that to support whatever. And I keep running, but I ended it at 2000. I was very happy to do so. I was tempted that next day to go out and run, but I didn't. I said, you know what, I'm going to go on a bike ride with my son. And we went on a bike ride instead of me doing a run that day. And that was that. And I ended up having the cataract surgery later in the year, and it went well. And that was another stage, another chapter kind of checked off the journey there.
Mm-hmm. So I understand when you reflect on this journey that you've been on, Jeremy, you used to be perhaps less others focused, and now you notice people who are struggling in ways maybe that you didn't before. How would you say the Jeremy of today is maybe different from the Jeremy a few years ago before you started this journey?
Yeah. Before my diagnosis, obviously I was a family guy. I felt like I was a good colleague at work. Mm-hmm. But my perspective, I think, was more attuned to like, okay, I'm taking care of my own. Y'all take care of your own. Mm-hmm. And we'll do our lives and essentially continue on to the extent that I wasn't so much involved in other people's lives. I had friends that I hung out with and so people I socialized with. But when I got my diagnosis and went into treatment and started to be around, especially when I went to sit to get a lab test done, or to wait to get a scan, or to sit in a waiting room with a bunch of other people that they may have a bandage on their arm indicating that they had labs today. Mm-hmm. Or, they come in and they're wearing a scarf because they have lost their hair. Or I see someone come in and they obviously have that look of uncertainty and anxiety that I'm familiar with. And you feel that with them. And it's kind of a shared sense of we're in this together, and you're no longer focused on yourself. You become more sensitive, I think, just by virtue of the shared experience to other people's needs. And there's also a comfort in being able to go up to somebody, even a stranger at Kroger that is obviously going through treatment, and you see that person, and just to go up to them and say, you know what, I know you're going through treatment. I've been through treatment. I can tell you, I know it's tough, but you're going to get through this. I'm a stranger and you don't ever have to see me again. But if some random person comes up to you, and I had that experience when I was going through treatment, random person comes up to you and offers you that kind of encouragement or that kind of compassion, you really start thinking, okay, this is not so much about just me anymore, or me being, in my family. There's a bigger experience and there's a bigger social contract that we have to kind of live out, especially, I think, if we're given the privilege of being a survivor. It comes with an obligation, I think, to put yourself into other people's lives in a way that offers them that care or that compassion or encouragement.
It's difficult for me to imagine you anything but a really empathetic guy, even before this journey, from what I know about you. But you mentioned some of those. There were some even may be small but really meaningful acts that occurred during your treatment that actually fueled you to look at others in a new way. Are there any of those that specifically stick out in your mind in your own journey?
Yeah, there are a few in particular. I can think the initial the probably the most the one person that stands out the most to me is my mom, because she has always been there, always been supportive, but I knew I was going to have to break the news to her, and it's going to come as a surprise, and I didn't want to upset her. No kid wants to upset their parent.
Yeah.
But I remember I had that initial phone conversation with my mom, and broke the news to her. I'm sitting in the floor of the bathroom. I'm in tears and voice is shaky. And what surprised me was that she was so calm and collected, and immediately just voiced a voice of strength that said, "You know what? We're going to get through this together." My stepdad was the same way. He just was a rock, and he and my mom gave me kind of that initial boost of strength to say, "Okay, we're going to get through this, all right." But along the way, there were others, and in particular, I remember the place where I went and got my treatment. There was a receptionist. She came out to me and was, talking to me. Didn't know me from Adam, and offered me some just encouraging words just off the cuff. And I thought, man, I really needed that. Thank you. And then there was one in particular too. I was very nervous. I was coming in to get the results from, I think it was my first MRI, to see if the cancer had been effectively treated or not, or if there was going to be more treatment that I need. I think it was the October 2021 scan results that I was getting. And I went in and I was very nervous, just out of my mind, kind of anxious. And the chaplain came to see me, he making his way through the facility, came up to me, and my wife was there. She introduced me, and I had never met him before, but he was an instant friend. And he grabbed my arms and because my wife told him, he's here to get his results. He's anxious. He could see I was anxious. And he, without trying to impress on me any particular kind of this or that, he just got in my face, looked me directly in the eye, and he's like, "You got this, you're going to be okay." He did it in a way that was like, wow, this guy just reached out and like in a time of need, met me. And I appreciated it. So those three examples, stuck out to me. There have been others, people encouraging me along the way. I had a buddy that, I missed a get together with him that was important. And I said, "Hey, I'm sorry I couldn't make it." It was really when I was getting my diagnosis. He called me out. He's like, "Well, why couldn't you show up?" And I told him, I was like, "Well, I'm not telling anybody about all of this. I'm not publicizing it, but this is why." And he's like, "Oh, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." But he's like, "You got this. I'm going to be there for you." And it was that kind of encouragement. And not to ramble on, but there are people who take the approach, I think, to their diagnosis, and it's as is their privilege to be private about it and to try to take their battles privately. As a show of their own personal strength, which I very, very much respect. And there are other people that are more public about it and tell others because I think they know that there's a benefit to having people offer support. And I started out very, very privately, but I got to a point where I felt like there was some ownership that I had at a point where I was going to use my experience to say, "Okay, I have this and I'm going through this. And if I can encourage you by letting you know that I'm going through that same experience, then great, we're in this together, And if I can come out on the other side and get to a point where I can kind of loosely call myself a survivor, even, which I still kind of, for sure, am reluctant to use the term because I don't know that I was ever in real mortal danger like a lot of people face. But there's a kinship there. There's a friendship that I have with other people who are going through that. And by all means, let's fight together and encourage each other.
I understand, Jeremy, that you have a friend who was recently diagnosed. If someone told you today they were just diagnosed with cancer, what would you say to them?
Well, I think first off, I'd say I'm sorry to hear that because it's never good news to get a cancer diagnosis. Nobody wants to hear that. but I would want to hear from them more about what it is that they understand that they're diagnosed with, and to let them know that there are places and there are providers that can offer a high level of care, and that nowadays, because of the way science has progressed, many cancers, even in later stages, are very treatable. And what formerly used to be the implication of the word cancer as just a bad thing, which it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't mean it's a death sentence. It doesn't mean that you're going to have what you would formerly perceive to be just this awful course of treatment. Maybe that's the case. Maybe you have to have a really difficult course of treatment to get through the other side. But I would encourage them to just realize that cancer's treatable, that there is hope, that you don't have to give up hope. You don't have to stop fighting. You can keep on doing the things that you're doing, likely, through your treatment. And there may be times where you have to take a step back, or you have to stop, or it's going to be difficult and you may have to readjust your priorities. But there is hope. You don't have to give up the fact that a cancer diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die. It may mean that you're going to have to go through some treatment, but there's a lot of treatment that's effective, and I would encourage them with that. And then also I would tell someone going through a cancer diagnosis, and I think it's very important, is to talk to people. Share with them your anxieties and how you're feeling, because it's okay to be fearful. It's okay. You don't have to be a rock. You don't have to have it all together. It's okay to, cry yourself to sleep, or to have a bad day, or to be distracted because all you can think about is what the results are going to be. That's fine. And dealing with those emotions is just almost as important as the physical aspect of going through the treatment itself, because it's a journey. It's just no fun. And I had it on the easier side of things.
Well, Jeremy, I think you're going to be an inspiration to others. I know you're already an inspiration and encouragement to others in your care and concern for them, and also what you've been able to manage through your running schedule and staying active even in the midst of your treatment. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
Just don't give up hope. Stay strong. Your own mindset about how you approach your condition and your treatment is going to help carry you a long way. If you can find something that you can continue doing, it doesn't have to be running. Maybe it's, taking a walk. Maybe it's, deciding to do something on a regular basis that's a discipline that allows you to check off another box of making it through, then do that, And along the way, there are going to be people who are also going through difficult times, and use your experience to encourage them and to give them the same kind of hope that you've been able to experience. I think that's super important.
Jeremy Swearingen, thanks for being on the Hopecast today.
Thanks, Adam.